All right, this is ninth grade lit, and we're doing Peace Child. Huck was telling us, one more time, if you don't mind, what, why Jesus was the better Peace Child.
So this all we had the Peace Child that was but it could oftentimes die, and that would break the bind and the peace between the two tribes. So he compared Jesus as kind of the opposite of the Peace Child,
Yeah.
because he was perfect and would never die.
Yeah, it's surprising to me how that Peace Child thing was so exactly like
I know.
the gospel story. They had, these people were the opposite of gospel understanding people, and yet they had something that nailed it. They knew exactly what it was. All right, who wants to do number 2? How about Andrew? Mayo Kadon.
It's like basically their way of saying God.
And who came up with that word?
Like,
That's a strange question to ask you. Who created that word? But we know who created every word in their language.
God, or,
Well, Don Richardson.
oh,
They had the words, of course, but not even a name. They had no word for that. They had no name for God. He created the name. Of course, every other word that they have, Don Richardson, in a sense, created by listening and just trying to imitate what he heard. Yeah, quickly. Yeah. Number 3. What happens when one accepts Christ into one's heart that is similar to the Sawi name exchange relationship? Can you answer that?
I don't know.
Like, remember, when they give the child away, the person has to accept the name of the person who gave it. They actually take the name of the, like, Maheen, I forget his name, but he's the first one who gave a child away, or the second, and so they named the child after
Yeah,
him.
so it's like what you said. You only like.
Yeah, explain that.
Okay, so it's like they do that because like to show like a sign of like good fortune towards each other's tribes and like unify themselves basically. And like whenever you give yourself to God, you get yourself baptized, and so that's like you committing yourself to God. So it's like.
Very good. You're on the right track completely. But why? What's the name have to do with it? Like, they actually exchanged names. They renamed the child.
Oh, cause like it's like if you like rename it, maybe it's like kind of reborn. And, like,
Yes.
Whenever you get baptized, you're.
Exactly. That's a perfect way to put it. Yeah. When you're reborn, normally when you're born the first time, you're given a new name. You're given a name. When you're born the second time, not usually given a name, but still, it's that same process. Okay. How about number 4, Zach? You got that? You have the questions? Just read it.
Why did the Kagar eat the peace child given to him?
I think we mentioned this last time. Like we just said, if the child dies, then the peace is.
Shouldn't they do it because in case there's an accidental death?
Explain.
Like.
Now, where's the peace child?
Well, because didn't they say it'd be living in everyone?
Yeah, would be in them.
Yeah,
Oh, I thought it was.
because
Go ahead. Andrew.
like Dave, because like they wanted him to like live forever. Like he thought that if it was in them, basically, like
Yeah.
still it wouldn't die. But
Yes.
it would live.
Yeah, Huck, what were you gonna add?
I thought it was because, I know that sounds right, but I also thought, wasn't there one that like they killed the peace child because they didn't give the other
Yeah.
person a peace child?
Yeah, it wasn't always done for that reason. So,
Right,
but
okay.
that was what one explanation was.
But then, okay, so did they always eat the peace
No,
child?
no,
Okay.
that was not common practice.
I must have missed that part.
Yeah,
did.
somebody did actually eat the child. Now, they're cannibals, so that's not all that strange.
A baby.
Yeah, yeah. How about 5? Jaden, would you read that?
At the beginning of chapter 19, Richardson describes the changes that the Legions were prepared in the beginning. What were some of these changes, and how did the gospel prepare the souls for these changes? Okay, so I said, some of the new changes were that, like, the census takers would soon, like, visit every village, and the police increase, the explorers.
What was that?
The police increase, no, they enforce or something, so I can't say. But, also Western Oil would construct massive,
Yeah, they would they would not allow people to eat each other. And so they would enforce what the gospel created by choice. You know, people, now they chose to give up these behaviors that the Indonesian government would require that and they would put them in jail or kill them if they did. You mentioned some of the other changes. The census takers you mentioned, the police, the schools would now require them to learn a certain language. They would harvest all the valuable resources in the jungles, you know, and so they would kill the crocodiles and hunt them. All these things were going to happen
Yeah,
anyway.
hunt them to extinction.
Yeah, these things were going to happen anyway. They were going to get oil. We know how important oil is. I haven't filled up since yesterday, but they're saying it could probably national average is $4. We're kind of reliant now on Russian oil and other oil, OPEC, the Middle East. We did, 2 years ago, we were producing our own oil. We were energy sufficient, energy self-sufficient. In other words, what's the word?
Independent, maybe.
There you go.
Now we can go electric.
Except that's not, as you know, that's probably not going to be practical, maybe ever, but it's a nice option. But we'll never do without fossil fuels, and I don't know why we don't just go back to what we were doing 2 years ago, produce our own. But anyway, they're going to go, and they did, I suppose, went and got oil out of Indonesia. So that was going to happen. The gospel made it easier.
What was the first part of that answer again?
Well, first they would enforce the laws. They weren't going to allow people to kill each other, fight all the time, and eat each other. They wouldn't allow that. And so what the gospel allowed them by choice, they would have forced them to do. When you're in the God, that's why, even though we have a constitution in our country that says what's right, what's wrong, you'll read this next year, maybe. De Tocqueville, have you ever heard of de Tocqueville? Was a Frenchman in the 1820s. You'll read this with Ms. Roberts when you're junior. De Tocqueville.
De Tocqueville.
He was a Frenchman who came to America to study our prison system. But what he wrote was this incredible book called Democracy in America. And the one thing I remember from what I read about it was he pointed out that and it's this poster up here that I got out of the newspaper about 20, 30 years ago, and it was either Adams or Washington said, none of that works. The Constitution doesn't work if we don't have, basically, he suggested, God. If the churches aren't teaching us to do, like, by choice, what the government's going to require us to do. The government, our Constitution will not work if we don't have people that on their own know right from wrong. And so that's what's happening here. The Indonesians, we take care of business. We'll put you in jail. But the gospel comes, and that's not necessary because they give it up. All right, so we're not going to get through all of this. I can see that right now, but that's fine. How about the capsized canoe incident? Anybody want to talk about that? Yeah, Alex, number 6.
I think I remember, since this was last week when I read this part, but I think Don was praying over them in the cups, like praying for God to help them get out of this situation.
Yes.
So I think that was what caused them, Yoda and Mao, to become closer to God. And once they got out of that, once they survived, they're like, God has protected us.
And I want you to remember those 2 names, because those were literally the first 2 converts that Don Richardson had. The first 2 people, and it was a direct result of a guy going through a trial peacefully, and they saw that and they said, we want what you got. And that's the first thing people will do. They'll say, you're different than me. I'd like to have what you have. That's probably how it's going to work, yeah.
But also in that situation, one of them, I forget who, Saul, he was, I can't believe that he remained so calm, because I know I wouldn't. But that just goes with, the peace that he had from God. But one of them, he asked, have either of you seen my son? Because, it was a baby boy.
Yeah.
And, he would have, I can't believe that he didn't drown. But the one on top of the boat, or whatever, said that he saw the person, so literally saved his son's
Yes.
life. So that was a big deal, right?
Yes. And their names, but then there was Hato. He was also there, and he said the same thing, and his daughter became a believer, and that's there is something to the fact that your family is the first mission field. That this first mission field God wanted was your family, and we believe, the church I attend believes that we call it a covenant child. Like my boys were born into a family of two believers, but that didn't make them a believer. But what that did do, the Bible promises that God will pursue the children of believers. And you look through the New Testament, and you have some guy become. Remember the Philippian jailer? You remember him? He was the one who was running the jail that Paul and somebody. Paul, who was his buddy? But Titus? No, not Titus. Whoever was with him, Silas. Paul and Silas were in the jail. There was an earthquake, and all the prisoners stayed because Paul kind of made them stay. And the guy was going to kill himself, and the prison warden and Paul said, "Don't do it. We're all here." And he fell down, and became a believer. And before the chapter is over, his entire family are believers. That's how God often works. You're not a believer because your parents are, but God will pursue you, and that's what He's doing right here in Indonesia, or not in Indonesia, but in New Guinea. And so they became Hato was the third person. I want you to remember these names, and his daughter Kimmy was the fourth person. It's hard to tell if that's exactly the order, but the fourth person we're told. How about number 7, the Wahari's death and the Alma May? I do want you to remember this. There's a couple of chapters on this.
Was this the one that was like, okay, so this is the other like absolutely nasty tradition
Yeah.
that they do, but like, I think this is the right part. But, the guy dies and pretty much they assume that he's dead because of that lady.
Yes.
Like witch, or I forget.
She was a witch.
Yeah, and she pretty much, could tell when the spirit, she has like visions of when
Yes.
the spirit of people leave their bodies. So she was like, guys, the spirit has left his body, but Dawn obviously knew better and like found that there was a pulse on
Yes.
the guy while they were like beating him and like poking him and putting like hot coals on him to try and get the spirit to return to him.
Yeah.
So he was like, he made kind of a rash decision, but also, I mean, ultimately a great decision, and said, if this guy gets better, then you'll know that it was my God who did it.
Yes.
And if he doesn't, obviously,
That's right.
so they nursed him back to health enough so that he like talked to them
Yeah.
a little bit, and but then ultimately died. But still enough. I mean, it was truly a miracle.
Yeah, and the issue wasn't that he died later. The issue was that he wasn't dead the first time. And
Right.
as you said, that was the issue, that the spirit doesn't leave the body until the spirit never dies. The body has to die first before the spirit leaves, and he was able to prove that. And many people were impressed by that.
And how awful, because they were not only their oppression was them being like literally buried alive.
Yes. Yeah.
Because they're still alive, and some of them would like wake up.
Oh yeah, then they have like bells, right? Like
That's Victorian.
I know, but that happened though. I remember that. They at one point they didn't know some people were waking up and trying to make off, so they put like a string attached to a bell.
Yep.
In case they woke up, because then they could ring it and they could take it off.
And that's funny. There was a time when we weren't for sure if someone was dead or not. Isn't that weird? That's
And this was the Victorian era. It's
not that long
super
ago.
long ago.
No.
It was more like superstition, I feel
Yeah.
like, but also like.
my father-in-law that lives with us tells stories. He lived in Goldsboro all his life about people who saw this figure dressed in white walking through the woods because she wasn't dead. They had buried her and she was still alive. She got out. These kinds of stories. I don't believe them or not. I don't know if I believe them or not, but that enhances this belief though that people were buried before they were dead. Yeah.
Could you imagine waking up in your own coffin? Like,
Nope.
like 6 feet underground in your own coffin, alive and you suffocate to death.
Imagine there was like a bell in there.
That's awful.
You see your phone on you.
That's awful. I
It is.
can't do that.
Wait, what?
Start
Yeah.
ringing bells during break.
My uncle is like a fairly big liar, but he's like he tends like to tell us the truth like at least like once a year. And one day at like a family gathering, he was like, "I have a picture of a ghost." We're like, "No, you don't." So yeah, dude, he's like pulling out like this like Polaroid picture. He's got like a ghost of like when he lived in Austin next to a cemetery. There was like a soldier like walking through his hallways, and we were like, "No, that's fake." But then it's so fake, and he's like, "No, it's true, it's true." And we're like, "You're lying."
Yeah, I told you my theory about ghosts. They're just demons. If it's anything at all. But
Right.
interesting. Let's finish one more. This is number 8. This is also part of this episode. What's the next chapter? Explain the sorry belief in Getham Asan, and Wanis. How were these two practices connected? And how did the gospel relate to these? So these are the only names. I'm going to ask you to remember these things. I'm going to ask you Amame and
Wait, Amamai, what's the difference? Okay, so I know that like Sawi, the first one is like where they do the like sago loaf with the thing and it's like
Oh, that's the
bind.
Wanis bind.
Right, the Wanis bind. And
Yeah.
it's similar to when they like, don't they like stick their hand in the rotting corpse?
That's the Getham Asan.
Oh, okay.
And what's the idea there? That's what they would do. They would have these rotting corpses, and they saw the practice. Anybody want to explain that? It's the
It's really nasty.
well, what they would do was they would think, what is the most humiliating thing you can do? And what is the most disgusting? So they literally are thinking, what's the most disgusting thing you can imagine? And that was what they came up with. And so to put your hand in that or to touch it humiliated you. And their belief, this is how it's connected to the gospel, because their belief was that if you reach a certain point of humiliation, the opposite happens. You are lifted up, and that's one way you can get eternal life. And if you think about it, remember the gospel, the most humiliating thing of all times is the death of God on the cross. And yet it is through that ultimate humiliation, naked, insulted, beaten. I mean, it's just awful to even think of those things. And yet it's
We are
through,
lifted up.
we are lifted up to eternal life. So that's another thing they had in their culture. So I believe the one is here, Getham Asan, is the humiliation aspect of it. And the Wanis part, I don't know how it's pronounced. I will double check that, but that I think refers specifically to the eternal life part. But I'll double check it before we, yeah, it's chapter 23, 22 and 23. So we're almost here at the end. I won't, touching the stench, literally is what Getham Asan means, and then the Wanis, yeah, oh, okay. It's a massive Wanis bind on the supernatural. Remember how that worked? It is
Oh,
connected.
So it's saying
Yeah.
like, it's pretty much, instead of connecting a person and like making them, it's like connecting the person to the spiritual realm.
Yes. Yeah, it's like the ultimate humiliation. You know, the Wanis bind, and you do something humiliating, you require the person to do something now for you, and so now you're doing something humiliating to the supernatural. They don't have a concept of a personal God, and so now the universe, and I've heard people say that, you know, they don't talk about God. The universe is talking to you or something, but that's kind of what they see. Now, Wanis is not the word that you need to know here. I want you to, we'll come back to this, but Ramon is the one, R-E-M-O-N. That would be number 9. So I'll go back at, yeah. The one, it is the same thing. The Wanis bind is the same thing. And so the Getham Asan is like the Wanis bind. And the promise of Ramon is the, and they have a story about that we can't get to today. But they do have a belief in eternal life. So they have the peace child. They have they have eternal life. They have things in there that are amazingly like the gospel, which is, and what I want to do tomorrow, just briefly before we go, leave it entirely, I'd like to look at the changes that happen. I'm gonna ask you that on the test next week, to identify the changes in the culture that happen when the gospel gets there, because those same changes happened in, say, Europe, after the gospel started spreading through Europe.
And it's not only great for the people, because now they've gained, like, eternal life in a, loving God, but they also are technically, complying with the rule, the new changes in society.
And why did Ye, remember this, guys, remember at the beginning, why did Ye want to have an alliance with Ham?
Oh, because to protect them
Safe
and to give them
passage.
more food.
Exactly. If people, actually, life is better when you're at peace than when you're at war. Life is a lot better. All right, we'll see you tomorrow.